at this point.
Mr. Chairman.
The Honourable Peter Dunn.
Mr. Chairman, the one thing that most people agree about this bill is that there needs to be an effective regime to govern our external intelligence agency. That is the starting point for this debate. The second thing I want to say, Mr. Chairman, is that this
Order.
bill...
I want to hear the member who's addressing the House. Let's have a bit of decorum. Honourable Peter Dunn.
The second thing I wanted to say, Mr. Chairman, is that this bill has nothing whatsoever to do with the recent unfortunate experiences of the Henry inquiry. That set of circumstances could happen under any situation. It has nothing to do with the GCSB legislation. And the third thing I want to say by way of a preliminary comment, Mr. Chairman, is that this bill as it stands, as reported back from the committee, is not satisfactory. And that is why I am moving a series of amendments which will need to be passed by this committee and by this House if I am to support the bill further. And the reason I am moving those amendments, Mr. Chairman, is that they strengthen the accountability provisions of the bill. They actually make it much easier in terms of transparency, and they address all of the major points that were raised by the witnesses who attended the Intelligence and Security Committee. Now, Mr. Robertson spoke earlier and expressed a lot of concern about Section 8C of the bill, and I agree with him. I think that the ability contained in the bill...
Point of order, Honourable Anne Tolley.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I thought there was a standing order in this House that you could not move seats to gain advantage to interject, and Mr. Cunliffe has done exactly that. His seat's way at the back.
Order. No, I don't need any assistance. I think we've come to a place that when the House is in committee, members move around, and I'd sooner handle this matter by order. This is a point of order. I'm on my feet. And I think we'll handle this by just saying, let's have some decorum across the House. And while this member has been speaking, there has been a barrage, and that's inappropriate. I'm on my feet, just be very careful. So let's just have decorum. As I said at the beginning of the debate, it's a matter of contention, but we will make no progress if we cannot hear each other. Honourable Peter Dunn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The point that I was making was to agree with the concern expressed by Mr. Robertson about Section 8C of the bill as it stands. What Section 8C says is effectively by regulation or order in council, any variety of existing government agencies could be added to the provisions whereby the powers of the GCSB could be applied to them in pursuit of their objectives. I think that's wrong. I agree with him entirely. That is why I am moving an amendment to delete Section 8C of the bill, which means that if there need to be additional entities added to the purview of this legislation, they will have to be added by way of separate legislation. So, Mr. Robertson, you should be supporting that amendment that I will be moving in this SOP that's before the committee at the moment. We'll also be changing in that SOP the warrant provisions to ensure that when a warrant is issued, it's put on a register, so that people actually know what warrants have been issued, particularly when they relate to New Zealanders, that the GCSB will never be in the position again of having 88 cases of dubious legality, because every year the number of warrants issued will need to be recorded, as will the number of occasions where the GCSB has cooperated with other agencies. Information that is not known at the present time. And, Mr. Chairman, the Intelligence and Security Committee, which currently has a very perfunctory oversight role, has its powers changed by my amendment to ensure that when it conducts the annual financial review of both the GCSB and the SIS, that hearing has to be in public. At the moment, it is behind closed doors, and members opposite who want accountability are now going to vote against, presumably, an amendment that says the Intelligence and Security Committee's operations, when it comes to reviewing the performance of the security agencies, has to do that in public. They're against that, and yet they want more transparency and more accountability. And, Mr. Chairman, they talk about a review. They want a review of our intelligence services. Under the amendment contained in my SOP, there will be a review early in 2015, and not only then, but every 5 to 7 years thereafter, of both the SIS and the GCSB. So the cry for a review again falls flat when these members have the opportunity to vote for one and they decide to vote against it. Now, Mr Chairman, let's talk about one of the other issues that has been raised throughout this whole debate, which is of critical importance. It's the definition of private communication and the issue of metadata, and Dr Norman made some good points in respect of that. The reality is, sir, that every witness who appeared before the Intelligence and Security Committee raised it as an issue. Every witness said it was important to get a solution. No witness offered a solution. I made the point of ringing a number of them to say, have you got a definition? Have you got a way through this? And the answer I got universally was, no, it needs to have a lot of work done on it. It needs to be worked through very carefully. And that is why, as part of the agreement I've struck with the Prime Minister, there will be work done on the Law Commission's 2010 report, which deals with this whole issue of the definition of private communications, not just in the GCSB legislation, but also in the SIS Act, the Crimes Act, and the criminal surveillance legislation, Mr Chairman.
The Honourable Peter Dunn.
Mr Chairman. So I simply wanted to make this point, that I listened to the major points made by all of the witnesses who attended the Select Committee. I read their submissions, and I noted that no one said we do not need a GCSB. No one, not even Mr .com. Everyone said we wanted to have tighter accountability, more transparency, more openness, and a better process. And, Mr Chairman, I have crafted amendments which deliver those things. So it will be very interesting during the course of this debate to hear those who cry for all of those things vote against them when they have the chance to do so. Mr Chairman, I started on the point that everyone agrees that we need to change the current situation. The consequence of these members' actions would be to preserve a most unsatisfactory status quo, where you have a GCSB that effectively has no accountability, where you have potentially 88 New Zealanders spied upon illegally over the last decade with no record of that. Mr Chairman, that is appalling. The consequence of opposing this legislation is simply that that intolerable situation would continue, and, sir, no New Zealander deserves to be treated that way. This bill, with the amendments that I'm proposing, will ensure that those days are well and truly days of the past, and that New Zealanders can have a fresh sense of confidence in the way their security services operate.
Honourable David Parker.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Peter Dunn, who just took his seat, said